اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وآل محمد. First of all, thank you all for joining us again this evening. I know that some of you were here last night, and for some of you, it is your first night. Inshallah, you'll continue to participate in our programming that we'll be having every night during the course of this holy month. I want to reflect a little bit with regards to challenges that we as believers often face, particularly during the month of Ramadan, as we're seeking toward making the strides to cultivating a sense of spiritual self during the month of Ramadan. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala numerous times throughout his book presents examples via stories of the previous prophets. And amongst the most famous stories or anecdotes that are mentioned within the Holy Quran is the story of Moses and the Pharaoh, Musa and Pharaoh. And this particular anecdote, it stretches out through the entirety of the Holy Quran, with not one particular chapter dedicated entirely to the story of Musa, salamullah alayh. Though chapter 28, Surah Al-Qasas, the majority of it does speak to it. And from this story, we extract numerous lessons. And the lesson that I want to focus upon for today, in light of our conversation, as we'll all share, myself and Imam Khalid and Sheikh Suhaib, over the next little while, with regards to doubts that we might face or obstacles that we might encounter when it comes again toward cultivating a sense of spiritual self. When you take a look at the story of Musa alayhi salam, it's virtually broken up into two important segments. There is the first part of the life of Musa alayhi salam with Pharaoh, and then there's a latter part of the life of Musa alayhi salam after Pharaoh, and after he leaves Egypt and he begins to take himself and his community toward the sacred city of Palestine. And over here, when you take a look and you examine the first part of the story of Musa alayhi salam, there is one important, as we mentioned, enemy that him and his community are consistently up against. That enemy, of course, is the Pharaoh himself, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala quotes Pharaoh when he states, Ana rabbukumul a'la. He himself claims lordship, godship over Bani Israel. In the second part of the story of Musa alayhi salam, we see that it was not the challenge of an external enemy that was difficult in bearing down on Bani Israel, but rather it was their own internal souls and their selves, which began to doubt, which began to become critical, which began to dismiss the instruction and the adherence of Musa alayhi salam. Over here, both of these stories and the community that we're speaking to, Bani Israel, and this common example that is presented within the Holy Quran speaks to the fact that believers are always going to be encountered with some sort of struggle. Sometimes the struggle is external, and sometimes the struggle is internal. Similarly, we fast forward to the life of our Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and also the example presented within the Holy Quran. For so much of the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks to the Messenger Rasulullah and the early Meccan community. Those who were initially believers, and then who were struggling so much with the oppression that they were facing from the Quraysh. So God numerous times presents the examples of those within the Holy Quran, those previous prophets who also had to encounter with tyranny, who had to encounter with political difficulties, socio-economic challenges, in order to console that early Muslim community and say, don't worry, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has your back. The same way that he supported the previous prophets and their communities who were sincere, he will also support our Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and you, O early Muslims of Mecca. But again, later we fast forward to the second chapter, right? Which is chapter 2 of the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is in the holy city of Medina. And over here we see that not only was that challenge of oppression from all external angles still present. But more importantly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to remind the community of the Messenger of God sallallahu alaihi wa about the bigger struggle, about amongst those bigger challenges. And that was not the challenge of any external enemy, but the challenge of the self. In the hadith from the Messenger of God sallallahu alaihi wa he says, "Inna a'da aduwak an-nafs allati bayna jambayk." That surely your greatest enemy is not the tyrant, is not the oppressor. Your greatest enemy is that soul which rests between your two shoulders. In other words, we're consistently up against the biggest enemy, which is ourself. And that negative self-talk many times that filters through our minds into our hearts, telling us, for instance, that we're not doing enough, or telling us that what we're doing is sufficient, even though we know that we have the ability and capacity to do more. This soul of ours is so important with regards to how we care for it, with regards to how we cultivate it, with regards to how we seek to filling it with virtue and with beauty and allowing for it to be a reflection of the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says within the Holy Quran, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. That successful is the one who has purified the soul. And unsuccessful is the one who hasn't taken care of it in the way that they ought to have taken care of it. A lot of times people during the holy month of Ramadan, or approaching it, getting closer and closer to it, or particularly in these first days, they begin to wonder whether or not this month is truly for them. And you begin to question yourselves, and we begin to question ourselves, wondering whether we are worthy enough to take benefit and to take opportunity from this incredible gift and blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. People say all the time, they say, well, I'm going to go to hell anyway, so what's the point? Might as well just enjoy the dunya, so to say. In reality, allowing for that thought to enter into our minds and then acting upon it and dismissing, again, what opportunity and what potential that this month of Ramadan offers us is something incredibly dangerous. And many a times that is allowed to enter into these minds and hearts of ours, again, because of our souls and their lack of ability or the lack of taming that we have given it throughout the year. But utilize these days and these nights as an opportunity commercially to hit this reset button. Again, as we see within the stories of these previous prophets, prophets and messengers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Musa alayhi salam, he tells his companions, he tells those around him, he tells his community, Bani Israel, he says, yes, we were successful with Fir'aun, but now you got to deal with something far greater. Are you ready to be in a state of obedience? Are you ready to change up the way that you think? Sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests people by means of socioeconomic challenges. Sometimes he tests the people by means of health-related issues. Sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests us by our environments. And the ability to see whether or not we are going to be able to truly find him and seek him and understand him and know him in the midst of all of the distractions that we encounter in this world. And particularly in this part of the world, and particularly with that sort of temptation that is consistently surrounding us on a day-to-day basis. So I go back to this hadith of the Messenger of God, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, in which he states, "Inna a'da aduwaka an-nafs allati bayna jambayk." That surely your greatest enemy is the soul which rests between your two shoulders. And this soul, again, like I mentioned before, if it's not taken care of, if it's not cultivated, if it's not purified, if it's not perfected, or if the intention is not there, again, then we can allow for all this negative self-talk to enter into our minds. Let me give you a couple of examples, then inshallah I'll pass it on to my colleagues. One example is that for many people, when they enter into the holy month of Ramadan, or even otherwise, that we tell ourselves that, for instance, I'm fasting for 15, 16 hours during the course of the day. Why should I spend time to worship at night? What's the point? I'd rather just go back home and watch Netflix movies all day long until the next day. Or on the other side, that because I'm fasting during the holy month of Ramadan, it gives me permission to do whatever I want before and after. Like a lot of people, they say, sarcastically, though it's not sort of appropriate to say, they'll say that, for instance, well, I'm going to perform everything that I want until I go for Hajj, and then after that, then I will go for Hajj. And I'll have all my sins forgiven, and my life will be taken care of. Like that sort of negative talk, again, when we allow for it to, be heard and then actually acted upon, is potentially something really dangerous. Or even with some smaller goals that we might set for ourselves. Let's say in the beginning of this month, it's really important maybe for me to make mention of this too, as a quick parenthesis. It's really important for us to set goals for ourselves internally during the holy month of Ramadan. And there should be two types of goals that we set. One type of goal is the physical, tangible, and the second type of goal is the spiritual, metaphysical. The physical type of goal that we want to set is you want to say, for instance, if you're not keeping up with your prayers, that I'm going to pray all my prayers during the month of Ramadan. If you already perform all your prayers, then you say, for instance, I am going to pray all my prayers on time. And if you're already doing that, then I'm going to perform recommended prayers before and after my obligatory prayers, just for example. Or if you set the intention that you want to recite verses of the Quran, then you make the intention, I'm going to recite 10 verses of the Quran every day. If you already do that, then you increase it to 15. And if you already do that, then you increase it to 20. Whatever you can in terms of capacity, these are what are known as physical, tangible goals that you can actually sort of hold yourself to account at the end of the holy month. And a second type of goal is the spiritual goal, whereby you look within yourself and you see what character flaws, what spiritual diseases that I have internally within me. And then I strive toward rectifying them. My daughter asked me today, earlier this morning, she's 6 years old. She says, what does it mean when you say that there's no more shaitan? She said, I still, have these thoughts and I still want to do this. Actually, we're talking about her younger sister. My younger daughter is 4 years old. And when we ask her, do you want to fast? She says, no, I need milk. She says, I want to eat chocolate. I want to eat candy. I want to eat everything. So we don't push her. So my older daughter was actually asking, Baba, you say that there's no more shaitan during Ramadan. What's happening to Maryam? Why does she keep on wanting to drink milk and eat candy and eat chocolate? I told her that when the shaitan is in prison, what happens to us is we actually know who we are a little bit more. No more putting off excuses. No more pushing off responsibility and saying, well, no, it wasn't my fault. It was shaitan whispering in my ear, telling me I should do this or do that or whatever it might be. But it's us. We have to look in the mirror and truly understand that I have these issues. I have to work toward fixing them, not in a way whereby you look at yourself and you wonder and then you just give up and you deprecate, you beat yourself up. No. Again, you see the day, you see the month as an opportunity. So the second spiritual goal, or the second type of goal that we want to set are these spiritual goals. When we look in the mirror 3, 4, 5 days into the month of Ramadan, and we realize we still get angry. We still like to gossip. We still like to do X and Y and Z. You look internally, you see what those flaws are. And then you commit toward rectifying them before the end of the month of Ramadan. That's what it's all about. That's what it's all about at the end of the day. And when we commit toward doing that, and when we make that intention to truly strive toward fulfilling the ultimate goal and aspiration that we have during the month of Ramadan, what we'll find again is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will support us in that journey. He's not going to leave us. That's what many people, they think. And that's the biggest doubt that we have to eradicate from our minds. The doubt that has crept into the mind that tells us that I'm on my own over here. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with me. So when you set out to make that intention, and you tell yourself, I'm going to perform my prayers during this month of Ramadan, that soul, if it's not been tamed, what's it going to tell you? It's going to tell you, well, you don't need to pray on time. At the very least, you're praying it. Or you need to worship at night because you're already fasting during the day. You need to wake up in the middle of the night to perform the night prayer because you're going to be really tired in the morning then. You make the intention that I want to give $100 in charity, but then you tell yourself, but now I really need those extra $50, so let me only give 50. No. The way that you break those shackles and those veils and that sort of tendency within that soul is to rush toward doing the good deed the minute that you make the intention. And through consistent effort, you're going to get there. Through focus and through diligence, we're able to take those necessary next steps. Everything starts with the mind, the heart. The physical body, for it to reach the goal, it will. I'll conclude with this last example. If someone, for instance, dedicates toward, running 1 mile every single day, and they're consistent with running this 1 mile daily, the minute that you ask them, how come you don't run 1.5 miles? They're going to tell you, because I don't have the capacity. Because I'm comfortable running 1 mile. In the month of Ramadan, we want to increase our capacity. And we want to break, again, all of those doubts, all that negative talk. We want to allow for that soul to be, we want to shatter that soul from all of those negative thoughts and tendencies that it's often inclined to. So you go back to this example, and you tell them, okay, or you tell yourself, if you're the one who runs 1 mile every day, tomorrow I'm going to run 1.1 mile. The next day I'm going to run 1.2. You can't tell someone who's never run in the last 2 years, why don't you go out and run, 5 miles tomorrow? The minute that they get out, their lung capacity won't have the ability, their legs won't have, they're going to fall flat on their face after 30 seconds. You need to build up the ability to do so. The way that you build up is making small steps. Small steps, and you make that into a half a mile, you make that into a mile, and slowly you increase. Similarly, with these souls of ours, increase that capacity, but do it slowly. So the takeaway, perform one action today, and for the remainder of this week during the holy month of Ramadan, that you otherwise wouldn't before this holy month. And then the next week, you increase that with another one. So if you're already performing your prayers, or you're already reciting 10 ayat of the Holy Quran every single day, you increase it to reciting 12 during the course of this week. Then next week, you increase it to 15. And the week after that, again, slowly, through this small effort and through this diligence and through this focus, number one, we'll be able to eradicate any of those negative thoughts that enter into this mind and soul of ours. And number two, we'll be able to cultivate it and purify it the way that it ought to be purified. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says within the Holy Quran, the successful one is the one who strives toward purifying it. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for tawfiq. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa alihi.
أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين الفاتح لما أغلق الخاتم لما سبق. Assalamu alaikum everybody. MashaAllah, coming to the home stretch. 1 hour left, MashaAllah. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, less than an hour I think actually, to make it easy for everyone inshaAllah, and to accept our fasting, alhamdulillah. What I wanted to talk about is this idea of doubt, perhaps from an angle that we don't think about, and that is from the angle of loving ourselves first. Loving ourselves is not necessarily a problematic thing. Everything should be in balance. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "Khayru umuri awsatuha." The best things are in the middle. And in two narrations, one of them, Sheikh, he mentioned from Sayyidina Ali, karamallahu wajhu alayhi salam, mentioned by Sayyidina Imam Tabrani in Awsat, that the Prophet he said you should consider your greatest enemy as the enemy that lies between your shoulders, your nafs, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But sometimes if we think about this and we get consumed by our own presumptions of our own evil, we will not love ourselves enough to take on our doubts. As someone who embraced Islam, in order to take on those initial doubts, I had to kind of love myself. What do I mean by love myself? That I am able to do what I know is best for me. And that may require bravery. Like the first time I went to a mosque, I was terrified. Like I was freaking out, man. And this was before like YouTube and Google Maps. So I just like went to a mosque. I'm just like knocking on the door, 17-year-old kid, ta, 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 ta. And this one Chacha Sahib, like uncle, right? He opens the door and I was like, yeah, I'm here to learn about Islam. You know, and he's like, who the heck is this kid, man? And then I was like, what are Sunnis? What are Shiites? Like, it's so cool. Like East Coast, West Coast, Pac and Biggie. Like, Sunnis and Shiites. And he was like, just sit down. And he gave me some kulfi. If you know what is kulfi? MashaAllah. He gave me kulfi. I became Muslim. It's like the best ice cream in the world. You give it to somebody, that's it. Khalas. So what I take shahada. But to go to the mosque was one of the most difficult things I've ever done. Simply because, not because of Muslims, I had to confront my own stuff. And in order to confront our own indiscretions and contradictions, we have to love ourselves enough to be sincere with ourselves. And the second time I went to a mosque, mashallah, was also really scary. This is after I became Muslim. And I didn't know how to pray. So, you know, like, obviously I'm like 20 years old. You can't tell me, as my father said, can't tell you nothing. Double negatives. Can't tell you nothing. 20-year-old man on top of the world, mashallah. So I went to the mosque and it was like, I don't know how to pray, dude. Like that's like stomping your ego with like Timbs on 124th or like in Brooklyn. I'm just getting stomped. My ego's getting stomped. And I walk in the mosque and there's this huge guy. And if I'm saying huge, he's huge. And his name was Abdul Hayy from Quds, from Palestine. So he came up to me with this big hand. He was like, brother, why are you here? I was like, I need to learn how to pray. I was terrified. He's like, first, come to my house. I was like, this is Kufi, I'm down. You know, like this Kufi thing is cool. So he actually lived next to the masjid. I don't know if you have any Palestinians here, but you probably know what he served me. He served me matluba. So by that time, I was like the most committed Muslim in the world, right? Kufi and matluba, khalas. Yeah, Islam lillah. Like I was ready to go, man. And then he had this big picture of Al-Aqsa, you know? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala free Al-Aqsa. In this front room. He's like, I'm your brother. And he passed away actually last year. Abdul Hayy. And he was like, brother, you don't know how to pray, do you? I was like, yeah, I pray, man. I was like, really an awkward moment, you know? And he's like, that's okay. Like, I'll teach you. So Abdul Hayy is one of the people, every time, imagine I pray, like he's still cashing in that Bitcoin mine, dude. Like those hasanat are just like lighting up his grave forever he talked to pray. But what I remember, and sometimes when I was talking to my wife about this, Mariam, I was like, man, I don't know how I did that at 20. I don't know how I could do it at 49. To be able to care about myself enough to confront my own fears. We're not all going to have the Scrooge moment where the ghosts from our past show up and compel us to like have that bravery. So one of the biggest challenges I see sometimes with doubts, in my own experience, is that we're too scared to confront them. So what do we do? Well, my grandmother used to say in the country farmhouse in Oklahoma, she asked me to sweep. I'm the baby, you know, babies we spoil, man. So she would ask me like, clean the house. I'm like, all right, I'm done. You know, my brother used to like hate me for this. And then I would like put stuff under the rug, you know, I'm trying to get away, put stuff under the rug. And one day my grandmother, she came and she's like, William, if you keep putting stuff under that rug, one day you're gonna trip over that same rug. Right? You can't hide your stuff. And she used to say to me, where you did it is where you get it. Right? Old school, porch grandma will not hesitate to violate your sense of Geneva laws if it's about keeping you in check. But I remember that. And I remember that in order to even ask about Islam and then to learn Islam, I had to love myself enough to drag myself to confront my own doubts. And I think sometimes when we talk about doubts, we posit in a way that it's on everyone else but us. But maybe it's because I'm not confronting them. The community may not welcome them. That's on the community. That's not your fault. That's their fault. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ, in this second hadith from Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, al-Khattab, who he came to the Prophet. He said, Ya Rasulullah, I love you more than everyone but myself. This hadith is read by Imam Muslim. And the Prophet said, you will not believe until you love me more than you love yourself. And then he walked away. Prophet is bold, man. He knows how to keep Umar in line because Umar's brave, you know. And after a minute, Umar, he ran to him and said, now I love you more than I love myself. And the Prophet said, and ya Umar, now you're a believer. That Umar is able to love himself to the point that he can admit his vulnerability. This is what I'm trying to get at here. And we live in a society that amplifies our insecurities, the advertisements, the imagery, the construction of beauty, the construction of value. We're so busy watching two people assault each other on stage, we don't even realize we're being assaulted. We're not aware of ourselves. That takes bravery. That's why one of my teachers, when I finished memorizing the Quran, he said, you know what the hardest thing for you going to be after you memorize the Quran is when someone corrects you because you think you know it, but that doesn't stop. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ, he said, An-nasul ma'adin. People are like metal. And what he meant, another narration, he said like gold and silver. Don't get mad at me. There's this line by Kendrick. I like it. I have a 20-year-old daughter, so I'm excused. Right? When he says, look inside my soul and you'll find gold and you might get rich. The song, don't quote the rest of the song because well, I'll be fired. Right? I told my daughter, what's the song? She's like, I don't know, it's just Kendrick. Kendrick's, I'm like, okay. Maybe it wasn't my daughter, but anyways, maybe it was me. But the point is, that line is incredible. And it really amplifies this hadith. Because in order to get gold and silver, you don't go to, in the time of the Prophet, you didn't go to the gold market. Where did you go? You had to dig. You had to filter. You had to get dirty. You may even fight someone over some gold that comes out of the earth. So what is the Prophet getting at? It's kind of like that line. You got to dig into yourself. And if I don't love myself in a healthy way, because the Prophet didn't tell Umar it's haram to love yourself. He said, you got to love me more than you love yourself. It's okay to love yourself, but don't be narcissistic. Put the haqq in front of yourself. He didn't tell him, Ya Umar, how could you love yourself? Astaghfirullah, you're a religious person. Loving yourself, this is haram. That's what a lot of us think. But he didn't say that. He said, prioritize your love. In order for me to dig into myself and to find the essence of my doubts and understand who I am, I have to love myself. I have to love myself enough to drag myself to ask questions, which I may be scared of confronting, but are ultimately going to be the best for me. So when we think about doubts, we should think about how the Prophet ﷺ encourages the lovers. He describes them as people digging gold and silver. Not digging junk. You dig deep, you find gold. Dig deep, you find silver. But you gotta dig, you gotta get dirty. You gotta filter things out. Muhasaba, accountability. Then the second thing is that when people ask questions, like now on Instagram, the Ramadan Q&A, people ask great questions, but they're very vulnerable. And they'll even be like, sorry, I'm sorry. Those of you who are students here with me, you know about this. When I first started teaching here, I'm sorry. So why do you keep saying sorry? NYU students, well, you know, like asking religious questions isn't like disrespecting. How are you disrespecting me? Like, am I that insecure? I don't have my own HBO show. I'm not insecure. I know who I am. I'm not going through that crisis. Then we made a rule. If you say sorry, you have to donate $5 to Islamic relief. Be confident. So when the man comes to the Prophet ﷺ, and he says to him, I have things in my heart that I'm scared to ask you. Yustaqbah and yuzkar. It's disgusting to even be mentioned. The Prophet said to him, really? Really? He said, yeah. He said, ذَاكَ صَرِيحُ الْإِيمَانِ. That's Iman. Because oftentimes doubts are not indicating that you're a bad person, I'm a bad person. It is a natural process of emergent religiosity coupled with a greater sense of religious maturity that you have risen above Sunday school Islam. What is Sunday school Islam? Allah is the truth. Okay. Muhammad is the greatest person ever. Okay. Islamic history is perfect. Okay. Spain was a gem. Where is it now? I don't know. Okay. But as you get older, it's like, okay, comma. That comma is healthy because it indicates a greater maturity. Muslims don't have any racism. Okay, we all love each other. Well, as you get older, start to run into these problems. So don't necessarily also locate doubts as I finish as indicating a weakness in yourself. Perhaps it is a sign of a greater maturity. And as we grow, the pixels in life become more particular. And as the pixels become more particular, we start to see more. And as we start to see more, we struggle to tie the heavens to the earth. And in order to do that, we have to love each other enough to ask those questions, to be that dude in Oklahoma who drags himself to a mosque. Wallahi, after I got in the car, after I ate the kufi, I was shaking, probably because my glycemic index is going crazy. But I was like, literally like, I just can't be, I went to a mosque. I was like, if my mom sees me, because my mom will literally pull over and put me in check, really. So don't necessarily think about doubts as a bad thing. And then realize that the worst doubts are those that aren't confronted. Keep putting them under the rug, one day you're going to trip over. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us to love ourselves in a healthy way, that we can find that gold in ourselves. And my experience as I finish is that when you develop the bravery with religion, it is systemic. It creates a healthy sense of bravery in relationships, in your work, your marriage, your kids, your parents, your friends. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum.
بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Listening to Sheikh Faiyaz and Sheikh Suhaib, Allah preserve them both. You need me to come over there right now. I'm not doing anything right now. Okay, well, that's all I have to say. May Allah preserve you. I'm being back in best thoughts.
I'm gonna help you, bro.
We'll do it. It'll be fine.
If that's the case, I'm out.
You did it to me yesterday, bro. Who remembers yesterday what Khalid did to you?
Does anyone have any questions
Or thoughts.
or any
Or-
thoughts
yeah.
or any
I'll
reflections?
trade the mic.
Yeah, please go ahead.
You can talk, I'll trade the mic.
Oh yeah, good.
Any thoughts or reflections? MashaAllah, on doubts.
External.
I'm doubting if Khaled's gonna come back.
He's not gonna come back. It's over.
Gone. But seriously, any thoughts? What are some of the obstacles to being able to address that emergent kind of religiosity next day? Any thoughts, comments? So we were talking about the challenge of doubts and how we want to be able to put ourselves in a place to be able to give the mic to Imam Khalid so he can continue his conversation.
Sorry about that. So just to go through a few things really quickly, I think in terms of what came in my mind. It's hard at times to be able to just move in a space where you can try to turn something on and off. You want to understand cognitively how we function and rooting this in our theology in terms of what the potential base of this is. In an Adamic narrative of creation, many of us are familiar with the story. Adam alayhi salam is created. Allah commands everything in the heavens to prostrate to Adam. Everything does except Iblis. May Allah protect us from his whispers. And when he doesn't do so, he says, I'm a fire, he is of earth. Why would I do this? But you want to think about this from the standpoint of what's going on in the heavens in this moment. Everything does something except Iblis. Iblis uniquely sees what everything else is seeing from a different frame of perspective. And what's being interjected in that moment is an act of arrogance, is an act of flawed logic, is an act of disobedience, is an act of racism. But it's also now interjecting this thing that we get challenged by day to day. Iblis didn't see it the way that it was meant to be seen. He's creating skewed perception. And what happens when we wrestle with doubt sometimes inwardly, what we identify as imposter syndrome, fundamentally, Iblis did not see Adam for what he was. We created humanity in the most beautiful of forms. His perspective was wrong. What he tries to do now is not just get us to engage in the act, but to influence perspective and to skew it so that it also has now a lack of depth to it. You get what I'm saying? There's 4 modes of which you can identify yourself. There's how you see yourself. There's how people see you. So there's how I see me. There's how Sheikh Suhaib sees me. There's how I would like Sheikh Suhaib to see me. And then there's who I actually am. And that latter category becomes the hardest to get to because of inward development that creates itself now as core beliefs that we consciously or unconsciously formulate that affirm themselves through how we perceive reality. So if I walk into a masjid and I don't think I deserve to be there, I'm going to then see my space in that masjid through that core belief that I'm not worthy of love. I'm not worthy of success. Nobody likes me. Nobody thinks I'm beautiful. There's nothing good within me. When our tradition teaches us about purification of the heart, we become subservient to language. And a lot of times when we think about this now, we think about it in a frame as if what we are purifying is somehow inadequacy and deficiency within ourselves. And I don't know about you, but I can tell you that a lot of what I have felt that needs healing and what my heart gives a bow to is not because of me, but because of the way people have treated me. Being brought up in spaces where the depiction of God was one that was an angry old man in the sky looking for a reason to punish me. Going to khutbah after khutbah that was just very black and white, hellfire and brimstone. This is what you do that's wrong. This is where you're lacking. A pedagogy that was rooted primarily in externals, a very fiqh-based mode of engagement that didn't identify learning fiqh as a part of spiritual enhancement, but in a weaponized mode that made me feel as if I would never be good enough. And that my default always had to be one that was self-deprecating. Shaitan wants you to see yourself the way he saw Adam that day. He wants you to believe that you are not worthy of the station, the maqam that Allah has given to you as creation. And the influence that now comes inwardly that starts to develop these core beliefs. And I want you to think about in your own socialization. How many people have told you from the time you grew up till now that they love you? How many tell you that they're proud of you? How many times in a week do you hear somebody say sorry to you? And not when you're walking down the street or on a subway and you bump somebody and there's no real attachment there. So there's not anything, I say sorry to someone's a stranger, somebody that you see day to day, an elder, a parent, a sibling, a friend. The absence of certain phrases and the presence now of other things that are deeply rooted in criticisms, negatives, that seek to just put you in a certain place that's not who you actually are, is going to surface at certain times. That when we say confront it, it's with a sense of compassion. When we say it's okay to love yourself, you surround yourself with voices that are going to be now what you need to overcome some of these internal voices that impact how you perceive reality. Do you get what I'm saying? You can see something and be totally skewed. The quintessential example that's utilized in our tradition, or I'll give you some other examples of what I mean, just in the interest of time. But in this month of Ramadan, you want to start thinking in that prism. What are the core beliefs that I have? Not abstract theology. I believe in God and the angels and books and messengers, but something that you can look to your own decisions, your own habits, and say, why do I see the world in this way? And why do I see myself this way? And how do I start to now harness and regain control so that the way that I'm dealing with my inside doesn't have me function purely in negative core beliefs? But I start to affirm now reality through the presence of self-talk that is positive in its undertone. And I allow for myself to do that, recognizing that sometimes it's going to be hard. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu is with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam on one occasion, and a gift of milk comes to them. And the Prophet asks him to distribute it to the companions who are there with him. And Abu Hurairah doesn't want to be the one to do that because he knows if he does, he's going to drink less. And when he's asked to do it, he does it because the messenger asked him to do it. And he goes now amongst the people that are there. And the worry is there that there's not going to be anything left for him to drink. And now when it's just him and the Prophet of God, he is giving it to the Prophet ﷺ, and he says, you drink first. And to his astonishment, not only is there something for him to drink, but he can drink in manyfold. And there's still something left for the Prophet ﷺ to drink. And in our tradition, there's a lot that goes into barakah in terms of experiences with food. When you look at the messenger and the idea that there's always enough for everybody. But for this conversation, what you want to understand that the only way that Abu Hurairah's doubt could be overcome was by going through the experience that allowed for the doubt to be curtailed. You get what I mean? My son Kareem, you saw him here yesterday. If you were here yesterday, he's now 6 years old, mashallah. He turned 1 when my wife and I were invited to give some talks in Malaysia and Singapore. And we were in Kuala Lumpur eating lunch one day in a food court in the basement of a hotel. And Kareem was turning 1, so he's a baby. My wife and my daughter Medina, they went to eat something healthy. Kareem and I went to Kentucky Fried Chicken. And he's crawling on the ground, getting closer to the chicken place. And we're from New York City. He grew up here. And there's now a ramp that goes not so high, probably from here down into the restaurant. Kareem's never seen a ramp before. He's only 1 year old. He doesn't know what it is. And so he looks at me to help him. And I am a bad father, so I didn't do anything. And now he's trying to figure out how to navigate this thing. And he puts one of his feet, he used to, when he was little, crawl backwards a lot. And he put one of his feet on the ramp and then he took it away. And he did that a few times. And then he put the other foot on the ramp and then he took it away. And eventually, a few minutes into it, he crawled down the ramp fully. And when he did, he looked at me in my face, and he had a big smile on his face. But the only way that Kareem could gain the courage to go down the ramp was by going down the ramp. Do you understand what I'm saying? And it's not always going to be the easiest thing, but sometimes the act that necessitates itself as the mechanism to overcome the doubt is the only vehicle that's going to help you through it. So a few things in the last 2 minutes before the adhan is called. You got to surround yourself with people that have positive voices. This is why in our hadith, we're told that we're meant to be mirrors to one another, that we serve as reflections, and you can help me see myself for who I am and not what the worst voices inside me render myself to believe that I am. That I can help myself through your presence to find what is inherently good within me. And through that, I empower myself in a way that renders positivity. 2, you want to frequent spaces that allow for you to find rest. Because it's hard when you're in a state of duress to be able to make sense of yourself and you're running on empty, you're overwhelmed. And what Ramadan is about teaching us how to regain control of ourselves and take moments to breathe. So in the best state of yourself, you start to look at who you are. Not when you're overwhelmed, not when you're anxious, not when the marriage didn't work out, the relationships broke, somebody passed away, the job was lost, you didn't get into the grad program, not when you make the worst mistake possible and shaitan gets in your head to get you to believe that you are not worthy of having a relationship with God because of a mistake that you made. But when you're feeling good, you're feeling whole, you're feeling stable within, then you build in deliberate moment for reflection in that moment where you have now not been in a debilitated state, but you have now reinvigorated strength. You say, who is it that I really am? I'm not just the logos on the clothes that I wear or the ornament on the hood of the car that I drive. I'm not just the job that I have that I equate myself to fully, but who am I in my entirety? You start to chip away at the doubt and the negative core belief, and you replace it now with something that's positive in its undertone. So you see yourself the way Allah sees you. You see in yourself your own potential, your own beauty, and you empower yourself through that. So we're going to pause here. Somebody wants to call the adhan for Maghrib. I think it came in just a minute ago. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll stand for Maghrib